All right, hello, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos here, and feature mostly great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, cosmology, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, and tour de forces that are usually pretty obscure, and things that, if you learn them, they would benefit your life in manifold ways, but especially your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And today is our 100th video that we have done on the book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha from Dr. Daniel Ingram. And Ingram went over to the Far East many times to sit in meditation retreats, extended retreats, meditating up to 20 hours a day for many days on end. And by doing so, such extreme practices, it kind of takes you into a different realm in terms of your concentration ability and just the fine-tunedness of your mind. And he was able to really tap into a lot of the Buddhist maps of the stages and states of consciousness, and identifies, and also picking the brains of the monks there, and reading as many books on the core teachings of Buddhism as possible. This is definitely not any type of religious program. We're trying to tap into some of the techniques that they use for both types of meditation: concentration practices, concentration on a particular object, and insight practices, investigations into the three characteristics of our mental and physical phenomena, our sensations. And the three characteristics are impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. So all our sensations have those qualities, and as we recognize that, we begin to cycle around the stages of insight as opposed to the states of concentration. The stages of insight can confer wisdom upon you. The states of concentration won't, but they will provide you with great bliss and exotic experiences that can keep you very motivated. We are almost done with this book, a couple more days, and we're in a section where he's trying to explain, it's autobiographical, and he's trying to explain kind of his meditation practice around 2001, and using kasanas, which are colored objects that you use for visualizations in concentration meditation, but he's kind of like trying to apply them for both magic and insight practice, kind of combining things. I think we're going to take over right here and see what happens. I got very good at being mindful of all the sensations of my scalp and face. I was trying to get so good at noticing all the categories of sensations that could make up the illusion of a separate self or subject that nothing would be left to create this illusion, as that habit of clearly perceiving the sensations that made up the illusion would finally become automatic. There is much more that can be said of that period, but much of it would sound repetitive, so I will summarize. After much struggle and experimenting with practices and experiences that might be considered relatively fancy, and after getting very frustrated with all of that, I felt strongly that I had to do another retreat. So I took some night classes, and in the 4th year of medical school, crammed all of my rotations together in the first semester, used weekends for residency interviews, and managed to graduate from medical school a semester early in December 2002. This gave me a large block of time before residency to travel overseas. And so this section is called the second MBMC retreat that's in Malaysia. As part of that trip, I went back on retreat from April 1st to 21st, 2003 at MBMC in Penang, Malaysia, this time with Sayadaw U Pandita Jr., not to be confused with Sayadaw U Pandita, but even though I have gone on retreat since, I still think of that as my last retreat. I spent the first week basically flailing around, but it was not what most people would consider flailing around, though it honestly felt like it to me at the time. By flailing around, I mean I sat, walked, and paid intense attention to what was going on, and what was going on was cycles, stages of insight, fruitions, jhanas, formless realms, Nirodha Samapati a few times, on, more and more, faster and faster, with what felt like a high degree of clarity. In short, I had skills, as Napoleon Dynamite put it, but they were skills that I had become totally sick of, as I had done all those things countless times before over the years, and none of it had resolved the question. I was basically rehashing old stuff and felt like I was getting nowhere, caught as I was in a sense of somewhere to get beyond what was just going on. After about a week of not impressing Sayadaw U Pandita at all, Jr., at all, with reports of all my various Dharma experiences, he finally said in so many words, "Yeah, okay, but at some point you are going to have to get your concentration strong." I was taken aback a bit, since for all my frustration and sense of failure, I was still pretty impressed with myself and my abilities. Reluctantly, however, I took his advice to heart with my standard macho bravado, yet a bit humbled at the same time, and began a project of going back to extremely simple assumptions, trying to go for 100% capture, not letting a single sensation anywhere in the entirety of experience go by without perceiving the 3 characteristics clearly. I did this from the moment I woke up in the morning to the moment I fell asleep at night. This was real Vipassana 101, just 6 sense doors and 3 characteristics, but with the seemingly preposterous goal of the true and final perfection of momentary concentration and investigation. Medical residency was coming, which honestly terrified me, given the stories my dad had told me about what it was like when he went through it back in the day. Retreat time would be extremely hard to get for the next 3 years, and I had only 3 weeks on this retreat, which seemed too short. I was sick to the marrow of my bones of my current way of perceiving things, so these combined to produce a massive mobilization of heartfelt effort. After a week of pouring basically every last ounce of power into perceiving every single sensation everywhere in the entire field come and go on its own, it seemed that I could perceive nearly everything come and go, but the cycles continued, albeit now much, much faster given the retreat setting. As the power spun up higher and higher, it got so that I was having a fruition every few minutes, even when walking. However, practice was still in many ways as it had been before, other than the extreme intensity and rapidity of it, and this was profoundly unsatisfying. I was also sitting with a teacher who seemed completely at ease and matter-of-fact with everything I brought up, cycles, jhanas, jnanas, paths, dharma theory, whatever, and although none of it particularly impressed him, he clearly seemed to get the key point beyond all of that. Again, he seemed completely comfortable, relaxed, at ease about all of it. This was the first time reports of my practice had gotten that response from anyone, teachers included, and it was such a breath of fresh air. Most of the time during interviews, Sayadaw U Pandita Jr. would tell a simple Dharma story, typically about Burma, which he clearly loved, and then just sit there, smile, hold his hands wide, and say something welcoming and calm like, "This is very nice. Come on, anytime." He was clearly implying that he was simply inviting me into a very different way of experiencing reality from my current one. That was one of the most profound Dharma teachings I ever received. Christopher Titmuss had articulated and embodied similar sentiments, but at the time I was sitting with him, I didn't have the capacity to comprehend them. So this section is called Untangling. On the 7th day of that second week of giving it everything I had, at about 2:30 p.m. or so, after a session of walking meditation on the second floor of MBMC, I was really exhausted from so much effort to clearly comprehend every sensation that arose and vanished. I decided to let the technique go, take a little break, and began walking across the floor toward a little table of beverages on the far opposite corner of that walking hall. The offerings included hot water, tea, hot chocolate, some Asian equivalent of Tang, whose label I couldn't read, etc. About halfway there, suddenly a suffering door fruition happened, which wouldn't generally be anything unusual, as fruitions had been happening so often. However, the ripping away of everything didn't have that creepy, violating feeling that the suffering door always had, and instead was oddly nice. This reflection on the memory of niceness in the entrance to fruition was noticed immediately when reality reappeared as being completely different, and then attention latched onto something in that recognition as object, and everything flipped over, like something fundamental had untangled itself. And then came the realization, holy shit, this is it. It was amazing. It was what I had been looking for. I knew it was the answer. Everything was just where it was. Cycles and stages and states were simultaneously irrelevant, and yet any stage or state that arose was an integral part of that moment, and thus the immediate solution to the problem. This moment was everything regardless of anything, and because of everything, it just happens. It knew itself where it was all the way through. It satisfied like nothing previously did. It explained the core of the Dharma and made it obvious in real time. In the seeing, just the seen. In the hearing, just the heard. In the thinking, just the thought. In the feeling, just the felt. Its pristine simplicity and directness were stunning. The cycles still occurred, but they had little relevance. Experience itself, as it was, however it was automatically it. As we will see, something in me contracted around this point shortly enough. But for an hour or two, the utter simplicity of the pure sense doors doing their natural thing reigned. True agencylessness is an acquired taste. I remember the first time that I fully appreciated that fact. It was during that first phase of being untangled. I was so excited by what had happened that I went into my room to sit on my bed. Then, without warning, the body got up and headed across the second floor walking room toward the bathroom. Strangely, there was no obvious sense of where it was going, why, or what it was going to do when it got there. It went to the bathroom, picked up the laundry out of the little spinning dryer, took a drink of water from the sink, and headed back towards the room. This out from control mode might have been utterly creepy had I been in a different state of mind. In fact, I have friends who report finding this phase of practice, in which we are just starting to appreciate the full depths of no self, to be utterly disconcerting. I was lucky to be so fascinated and relieved by the fact of the answer not depending on any cycle of insight or jhana that I didn't react badly to it. But I can totally get why someone experiencing that new way of being might suddenly contract rapidly back into the familiarity and comfort zone of the illusion of control. This section is called agencylessness. I thought I would pause here to unpack agencylessness, to explore how the illusory sense of an agent is created in the first place and how to do something about that. The layers and qualities of mind that create the sense I am doing things are many, but not infinite, and so we can debunk them through clear, systematic practice. Focusing directly on these qualities of intentions and actions arising naturally based on causes can be very skillful practice. There are many teachings of the Buddha that address these aspects of practice. First, we have some perception of intentions as they arise, but it is generally poor perception. That we know what we are going to do before we do it is powerful conditioning for the mind to get a sense that some I is performing the actions. However, while intentions arise on their own, naturally, causally, there is insufficient clarity to perceive that. So we get the sense that we are creating the intentions and so controlling actions. In mind and body, the earliest insight stage, those who know what to look for and how to leverage this way of perceiving reality will take the opportunity to notice the intention to breathe that precedes the breath, the intention to move the foot that precedes the foot moving, the intention to think a thought that precedes the thinking of the thought, and even the intention to move attention that precedes attention moving. Even before mind and body, one of the very first insights that practitioners have is that they can't control their noisy minds going deeply into this basic first insight. Taken far enough leads to wisdom. The relationships between intentions and actions become much more obvious in cause and effect, the second stage of insight. When those who appreciate the remarkable ability to dissect how intentions lead to actions will be rewarded by clear insights into this process. Notice what happens just before you move, speak, or think. Keep attention phase-tuned to that part of the process, that intentionality that knows what is about to occur, that has mapped it out in space, thought or language, before you move, think, or speak. This sort of systematic practice that keeps focused on the sense of the locus of control and planning will set up the foundations of penetrating the illusion of agency. As the three characteristics kicks in, practitioners will notice strange movements and tension starting to show up in a way that is clearly not entirely in their control. Those who can get past the irritating sensations and hard pains and turn to the no-self aspect in that state will realize that so many sensations arise totally on their own, including the irritating tensions and strange movements. By the time of the arising and passing away, the fourth stage, many practitioners will be noticing all sorts of fascinating sensations, vibrations, pleasures, and other rapturous experiences welling up naturally. But many will be too enamored of these experiences to contemplate the remarkable fact of the natural, causal welling up itself. Still, if you know what to look for as you cycle through these stages, you can focus on that aspect, the aspect that debunks the agent. Dissolution tears down so many aspects of the agent. So many aspects of experience are perceived to fall away, dissolve, disappear, and if we notice that intentions themselves just dissolve even before they lead to actions, that couch potato effect, then we can gain direct insights into that aspect of the illusion of the agent. The rest of the Dark Night, stages 5 through 10, brings up so many experiences naturally, though their unpleasant aspects and the fact that they are hitting so close to home tend to overwhelm many practitioners. However, those with their eye on the prize of agencylessness will reflect, so many experiences arising naturally, totally on their own. This is gold when it comes to perceiving the naturalness of causality for core aspects of what seems to be the agent. All the protests, frustrations, negotiations, bargaining, strategizing, see all these arise naturally. Tune deeply into the intentions themselves, driving those. This can be strangely powerful practice that recovers the clarity at the center that leads to something opening. Keep your morality strong when emphasizing agencylessness, particularly in the dark night. Equanimity, stage 11, is a remarkable stage in that it begins to encompass the whole layer of mind we are working on as a flowing, integrating, fluxing whole. In that layer, all are the core processes, the subtle core intentions, the last holdouts against insight, the core illusions that maintain the sense that there really is some I at the core of what is going on. Contemplate those core processes, those last holdouts, those intentions that drive our practice, and perceptually integrate the very center of who you think you are with the rest of the flowing world. Finally, at conformity, which is really the peak of equanimity, we break through, even if just for a moment, and fruition completely takes over after the perfect naturalness of the three doors. At that point, we have perfectly glimpsed, for just a moment, not only the illusions that make up the agent, but also perceived that agent to cease, to be absolutely transient. In the restart of reality, we can notice how the illusion is reestablished. That careful, meticulous, intentional focus of our investigative mind on the restart can finally convince us, layer by layer, that there truly is no agent, and that causality and the lawfulness of reality are real and always have been. As these insights percolate through the layers revealed by each past cycle, we can finally be done forever with the illusion of an agent and never contract into that illusion again. One thing I should mention about models that involve agencylessness, no self, equanimity, and the like, as well as sitting through pain, pleasure, boredom, hunger, and all the rest, as is generally required on a serious course of meditation. There is a shadow side that is easily created from passivity, unskillful tolerance for situations that are suboptimal, and a lack of care for yourself and possibly others. With that pain in your chest, you might think it will pass, when perhaps being so cavalier about health is not an adequate plan of care. That need to clean your house, you might say to yourself, just more maya, more samsara, not really needed. That relationship that you just let crumble, Maybe it could have used just a bit more gratitude, attention, and love. You get the picture. More insight practices that are very direct, particularly very dry vipassana, as I was doing at that point on that retreat, have not only the potential to create deep wisdom, but also have a strong potential to create these sorts of serious shadow problems. Stay on guard against this sort of apathy and self-rationalizing neglect when chasing any ideal such as this one. It is not that agencylessness isn't a key part of the final puzzle. It is. But any action, any thought, any intention, any word, all of that was already agencylessness, and you had yet to realize it. All effort, all drive happens on its own. Thus, like all the ideals presented in the models of awakening, beware of solidifying it into something unwholesome or detrimental. All right, back to the story. This section is called Wobble and Fall. Speaking of contraction, an hour or two later, this pristine and oh-so-right way of perceiving started to break up, and that clean space began to shudder. And then, before I knew it, it was gone. Reality had retangled. I had no idea why I didn't realize what was going on when it retangled, but the effect was glaringly obvious, and the cause would slowly become more obvious. My reification and subtle grasping at something that you would think is ungraspable, but until one really gets something in the depths of that ungraspability, that holy shit, this is it reaction can totally derail that otherwise exquisitely clean perceptual mode. Because of this not so subtle attachment to detachment, I was back to states and stages and cycles and very subtle yet mind-bogglingly annoying duality. It was like having my heart broken by my one true love, like watching my best friend be murdered, like having my greatest treasure stolen, like the world collapsing into war and chaos before my eyes. I felt like the worst thing my mind ever did, and my mind has done some pretty bad things. I did everything I could not to panic, but some degree of panic set in anyway. I was terrified I would never get it back. This derailed my practice for maybe an hour or two, and then, remembering what had gotten me there in the first place, I pulled it together, went back to core assumptions, 6 sense doors, 3 characteristics, started practicing again, powered up to total sensate comprehension again, and relatively shortly thereafter, it flipped over. Everything righted itself, the knot untangled, fundamental perceptual identification and division stopped, and it was okay. Actually, much better than okay. I was satisfied. Then, an hour or two later, it happened again, a shudder, a wobble, like a top spinning off kilter as it begins to slow down, like a mud clot thrown into a clear, reflecting pool, like some destructive warp in space caused by a bizarre alien weapon in a sci-fi movie. Shortly thereafter, during a meeting with Sayadaw Pandita Jr. about my practice, and while I was in the synced mode of attention, I said simply, cycles, stages, powers, experiences, they all come and go on their own. And then I just smiled. He looked at me and said, with a huge smile directed to the nun sitting next to me, "Did you hear what he said?" Like it was the most beautiful, important thing in the whole world, which it was to me at the time and still is. So the pattern went on every few waking hours for almost a week. Heartbroken, everything screwed up, cycles, stages, fruitions, jhanas, formless realms, all utterly dissatisfactory. Then after an hour or two of good practice on just what was happening, flip. Wonder, amazement, happiness, rightness, satisfaction, centerlessness, effortlessness, immediacy, and peace. Then, an hour or two later, wobble and fall. It is because of that week of gaining and losing that pristine, centralist clarity that I can tell you for certain that the perfectly synced way is better, vastly better, and the other way, by comparison, totally sucks, despite how impressive all the stages and states and all that may seem. The difference is simply huge. Those days of alternating between the two radically different modes of perception made the meaning of fundamental suffering abundantly clear, with that period of practice driving the point home with sickening regularity every time the pristine mode would break apart. Somewhere in this phase, Sayadaw U Pandita Jr. gently said to me, "You know, some people are arahants only on retreat." Those terrifying words galvanized whatever else in me that had held back. Okay, try a couple paragraphs of this next section called Vimudamaga, the Path of Freedom. After just less than a week of going through what felt like sequential emphasis during the distorted periods on the four foundations of mindfulness, the first physical sensations, then aspects of Vedana, the degree of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality of sensations, then mental qualities and thoughts, then finally attention itself, in that order, it felt like everything converged in some complete and total way, flipped over, and that was it. The shift contained the deep and abiding realization that it was never not that way, that even the most screwed up periods had been as they were, even when they seemed that they weren't. I had barely done any teaching or writing in the few years before that retreat, frustrated as I was by an understanding that felt very close but was not quite there. Just after the thing synced up for the last time during an interview with the Sayadaw, I mentioned this lack of teaching and said that I had thought about teaching again, and he looked me square in the eyes and said simply, "Good." Then he told a long story about some monks in Burma, and then at the end, as a summary of the clear moral of the story, said, "And that is why you shouldn't go around saying you are an arahant or have powers," and again looked me straight in the eye. There were only 3 people in that room, the faith follower none, him, and myself. I clearly have not followed that second piece of advice, but then again, neither did he, as he demonstrated powers on that retreat and clearly considered himself an arahant and would speak about it so clearly that it couldn't possibly even be called veiled speech, despite him never using the actual word.